Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering thematic walking tours in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director of the company, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's show. What are you afraid of? In the show, we're going to be exploring the science of fear with sociologist/fearologist Margee Kerr. Before speaking to Margee, I thought it would be interesting to see what our customers, fans of ghost tours, are afraid of.
Not big on the dark.
Not big on the dark?
No.
Are you a little nervous about going on the tour in the dark?
No, I've gone to several of them. I grew up in the country, but it just gets creepier at night.
Spiders.
Hey.
And they come in various categories of sizes, right?
When did this fear first start? Have you always been scared of spiders, or did anything
I have no... It's probably from my mom. Because we get a lot of our fears from our parents, so it's probably my mom, because she was freaked by every bug on the planet.
Rats.
Rats, and why rats?
Don't know, just give me the heebie-jeebies.
No bad experiences with
No,
rats in the past?
no.
Just if you see one...
Yeah, just don't like them. Yeah, they just give you the creeps.
Heights. Bats. What I can't control. Cockroaches. I don't like cockroaches.
Clowns.
And why are you afraid of clowns?
Because they're just something really creepy about them. Like It. Movie It?
Have you seen it?
No.
Don't describe me as a child.
I'm afraid of flying, but that's not terribly unusual. Usually at cruising altitude, I'm okay. But on takeoff and landing, I am desperately looking for the ground. I'm afraid of, needles. I just don't like the idea of, something puncturing my skin. I don't know, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Erupting volcanoes.
I have a strange fear of styrofoam, but I wouldn't even say it's a fear like spiders. But I don't know, I just can't stand being in the same room with styrofoam.
My mortgage.
Given that I put several of our customers on the spot asking them this question, I think it's only fair I make my own confession about my secret fears. And number one on that list has to be skunks. I am terrified of skunks. Some people find them cute animals, but I see them as agents of chaos. Now, I'm not sure if this is because when I was growing up as a kid, our family dog had a very close encounter with a skunk, and I still remember as soon as he came back in the house, I was up in my second floor bedroom, as soon as he came in the house, the smell just permeated the entire place and seemed to hang around for weeks. So now, whenever I see a skunk when I'm out for an evening walk, if it's anywhere from, 5 to 50 feet from me, I will take evasive maneuvers. Before we get to my conversation with Margee, I do have another secret I would like to share. We haven't announced this publicly yet, but the vast majority of our Halloween season tickets, which is going to run from September 29th to November 4th, are now up for sale on our website, hauntedwalk.com. So the prime slots are there. I wanted to give you the first opportunity to grab them. And also, as a way to say thank you for listening to the show, if you use the promo code Haunted Talks, name of the show, no space between, Haunted Talks, at checkout, anytime before Labor Day, you can get 15% off your tickets. So hauntedwalk.com, promo code Haunted Talks, get you 15% off. I think it's going to be our biggest Halloween season yet. A number of new tours. Highlights include our original Haunted Walks. Those are our classic city tours in all three cities, Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, are all up for sale now. In Ottawa, off a very successful summer run, we are bringing back our 150 Years of Canada's Scariest Ghost Stories tour, which will share some of our ghost stories from coast to coast and take you inside the Bytown Museum, one of the most haunted buildings in the city. We'll also be offering our Incident at the Bunker, a zombie adventure, where we put you in the middle of your own zombie film as we go deep into the heart of the Diefenbunker. In Toronto, we will be continuing our run at Black Creek Pioneer Village, which continues to be a place where we're seeing an abnormal amount of activity. A lot of strange stuff going on there. That's going to be running on Saturdays and select evenings through October. We'll also be offering special versions of our original Haunted Walk in Toronto, which will include an opportunity to go inside Mackenzie House, which is one of the most well-known haunted properties in the city. In Kingston, we will be partnering again with Fort Henry and be part of the Fort Fright event taking place. Tickets for that aren't quite up for sale yet, but our Tales from the Tunnels will be returning as we will be sharing some of the fort's best ghost stories. For tour information, hauntedwalk.com is where you can find us, and on social media, please be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all at Haunted Walk, as there'll be a number of special ticket giveaways and promotions we're going to be running leading up to Halloween. Margee Kerr has a PhD in sociology from the University of Pittsburgh, where she currently teaches and conducts research on fear, with a focus on how and why people engage with frightening or thrilling material, activities such as haunted houses, the paranormal, and thrill rides. Dr. Kerr also consults with amusement parks, attractions, and museums on how to create thrilling experiences that are entertaining, immersive, and even educational.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm very excited to talk to you. Just finished your book, Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, and absolutely loved it. And, when I tell people I'm the creative director of a ghost tour company, I often get a lot of, raised eyebrows and kind of strange follow-up questions. So I'm very happy to be able to turn the tables on you and have a chance to ask, how did you end up becoming a sociologist that studies fear and consults with haunted attractions?
It really was the merging of all of my favorite things. I earned my PhD in 2009, and for years my focus was on understanding fear as a very toxic force in society. So the root behind, racism and discrimination. But at the same time, there was a part of me that really enjoyed scary things like haunted houses and scary movies. And I had one of those moments where I thought, wait, there's a bigger story here. This paradox of, living in the U.S., which many would argue is kind of consumed with fear. Yeah, we want to do things that scare us. So I started looking into that and working with haunted attractions to understand why people would voluntarily, scare themselves, and did lots of survey research. And now I'm working with a colleague at the University of Pittsburgh to really tease this out and understand what we're getting from this. And at the same time, I really, I do enjoy doing scary things. So my creative side really likes to work with attractions in creating experiences that are going to be fun, scary, that are going to leave you feeling better and excited, not traumatized.
And is this something, growing up, were you the type of kid that, like for me, I loved going on the dark rides, scary movies, all that stuff held a lot of allure for me. Is kind of your experiences or your enjoyment in taking part of these potentially frightening situations or activities or entertainment, is this something that's been with you your whole life, or is this really developed as you've really studied the subject matter?
I've always really liked haunted houses. I went to my first one when I was just a kid. It was in a gymnasium of a local school, and my cousin had, was part of designing it, and it was so much fun. I had a lot of fun. I loved the costumes, and I loved all of the decorations and the props, and the whole holiday of Halloween was my favorite. Candy, friends, getting to run around late at night. So from a really early age, I liked Halloween and haunted houses. I didn't ride a lot of thrill rides until I was older. We didn't go to amusement parks, but I did grow up around horses and riding horses and doing lots of scary kind of semi-reckless things, on the farm. And so I think that I've always had a kind of thrill-seeking nature. And now understanding that from many points of view has really helped me grow as a person and also, figure out why these things are fun, why I grew up loving them.
Now, in the book, Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, you challenge yourself to experience some of the most potentially frightening situations in the world, all in the name of science, which was, I thought, very, very brave of you. And just to list a few of those challenges, they include riding ridiculous roller coasters, time in solitary confinement. You've worked and toured haunted attractions all over the world. You've contemplated life and death in Japan's infamous suicide forests, and walked the streets of Bogota, Colombia, alone and lost. And I would say reading that chapter of the book almost gave me an anxiety attack, imagining myself in that same situation, an absolute page-turner. Now, one of the really interesting things I think about fear is how subjective it is. For example, if I gave that list to a group of people and asked them to kind of rank them as to which of those experiences they would be most scared or fearful about, it's possible that each of them would come back with a different list. We get entirely different lists from the entire group. So I'm curious, why is fear so personalized for us?
It really is a personalized experience and so culturally constructed. And that's because it's what we fear basically at its very root is things that we don't know. So the unknown and the uncertain. And each culture, each person is going to grow up having different uncertainties, different things that are unknown, and also different experiences that will impact them potentially in a negative way. So, for example, those who grew up, I think it was in the 1800s, there was a mass panic around being buried alive. And that was a very real threat for people because there was no standardized way of determining death. And there were, experiences of people actually being buried alive. And, you look at today in different cultures and you can see that we really are taught from a young age what to fear, what to be afraid of. And that's going to be influenced by the neighborhoods that we live in and the environment that surrounds us. Those who grow up on farms have a very different set of threatening objects that could harm them. And so it's very culturally influenced. And then at the individual level, it only takes one bad association with something to really solidify it as something to be afraid of. So, for example, if you do happen to encounter a clown as a child and something bad happens at the same time, you could grow up fearing, having a fear of clowns because of that negative association. We build our fears around our previous experiences, around what we hear from society and our parents. And in that way, it does make it very individualized.
A question I hadn't really planned on asking you, and it seems perhaps culturally relevant at the moment, seeing what happened in the U.S. this weekend with the neo-Nazis, the KKK. What role does fear play in those groups? I can't help but feel, I guess, cultural identification or sympathy with other people of other races. Fear must play some kind of issue in there as well, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's something that hasn't left my brain ever since Friday night and seeing this unravel. And the question I keep wanting to ask is, what are they so afraid of? What are they afraid of? And when you hear what their chants are, we will not be replaced. They're afraid of not having the position of power, of dominance, of not being the only voice that's heard anymore. And it's so hard for me to understand because, I believe in equality. Everybody should have access to the rights and liberties. And so it really just makes me wonder, what are they so afraid of? Why is it so threatening just to allow other people to have the same rights and opportunities? And it's funny, I think Oprah actually had a show back in the 80s that said, when you start with anger, if you keep digging, you'll eventually come to fear. And it's these base insecurities that often are driving anger and hatred, and it's very upsetting.
Getting back to the book, because we're not a political podcast, maybe we'll leave that for now, but a very interesting subject matter, I think. You mentioned in the book that perhaps your most frightening physical experience took place at a landmark that many of our Canadian listeners would be familiar with, and that's the CN Tower, where you did the Edge Walk, which is the world's highest hands-free external walk around the top of the tower. This is something that I've been scared of just hearing about it over the past few years. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience doing the Edge Walk, and I guess the shift that took place in you, which was extremely fascinating, where you went from almost being immobilized when the experience began, but by the time it got to the end of it, it was almost liberating or became a very positive experience. Could you share with us a little, I guess, about the experience and the science of how your psychology of it changed?
It really was a life-changing experience. And part of that was because I was so surprised by my own reaction. I've never been afraid of heights. I thought that it would be, not easy, but I wasn't afraid going up. I was more excited and, filled with the anticipation, and I was confident in all the layers of security. And so when I walked out onto that grate, I just was completely overwhelmed, and my brain just, it felt like everything was saying, what are you doing? You need to go back inside. This is not what you were made for. You don't know how to fly. And I was just completely overwhelmed. I was so shocked by my response and literally immobilized. I didn't feel like I could move, and my legs, they felt a heaviness and also a sense of energy at the same time. And that's related to the fight or flight response and all of the chemicals that are released in our body in these heightened states of stress. So I've got the adrenaline and endorphins, and my body is trying to convert, as much sugar into energy as possible. And my heart was racing, and all of my senses were just kind of flickering on and off, like my hearing and my sight, and everything just was blurry for a second. And it was the most frightened I've ever felt in my body. And I think because the location, because I didn't really have to think about anything else. It wasn't like I was, in the streets of Bogota. I was just on this grate. And so I had time to just bring awareness to what was happening. And it was so intense. And I did think that I peed my pants, and I hadn't, but it was just such an overwhelming feeling in my body. And the edge walk is so great because you're out there for a long time. So you have time to kind of go back and forth between thinking about what you're doing and then just experiencing it. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And I did come away from it feeling like I could do anything. I remember getting down to the bottom and walking out and just feeling like, oh my gosh, what's next? And it's still a moment that I think of whenever I'm feeling afraid or stressed or like I can't do something, or, I'm feeling incompetent. I think, oh my gosh, I leaned over the edge of the CN Tower. I can do this, because that was one of the hardest things. The guides, they tell you that you have to, or you don't have to, of course, but to lean out over kind of like Superman. And I mean, it was so hard to do because your body is telling you not to. But when you do it, the sense of accomplishment, even though you're attached by a harness, you really do feel like you've just climbed Mount Everest. I mean, it was really amazing.
So I assume this explains to a large degree why we seek out scary experiences, because there is almost like a mental health benefit, a physical benefit, or a high, I suppose, even that comes from doing them. But at the same time, not everything that is scary has these pleasurable aspects. For example, in the streets of Bogota, where the experience you might face was completely unknown, are there kind of some rules around the types of scary experiences we would find pleasurable or even healthy?
Yeah, and that's what my colleague and I have really focused on, is looking at the boundaries of fun scary. Under what conditions is this fun, therapeutic, or helpful? And it really starts with choice and safety, ironically. And this is something that I'm always talking to a lot of haunted attractions about, is that the critical importance of people recognizing that your establishment, that the experience is safe, because that's what then allows them to lean in, to engage in the experience. When we're really in a threatening situation where we don't know what's going to happen, where we don't feel safe, that's where, it could potentially lead to trauma and definitely not having a good time. But when we know that we're in a safe place, we can push ourselves and challenge ourselves, a lot like rock climbing or, even running a marathon. It's the ability to choose to push yourself that then can open an opportunity for growth and feeling like you've challenged yourself and you've achieved something. And yes, growth can definitely come from scary experiences that are not, of your choice. But if you're looking for something that is going to, give you a boost of confidence, that's going to be a kind of just quick pick me up, then doing something safe, scary is a good bet.
And when we typically imagine scary scenarios in our mind, I think we often imagine ourselves alone, without any help, left to our own devices, unsure what's going to happen, lost in a strange place or in a haunted building or something of that nature. But I would say one of the observations we have made over our 20 plus years is that our tour groups that seem to get the most frightened or have the strongest visceral reactions are often the ones that have larger groups of friends or family within them. Considerably more so than, say, if we have 10 couples who don't know each other in a group. Now, this seems at first glance very counterintuitive because you expect with the support of your friends and family that maybe things wouldn't be that dramatic for you or that frightening for you. But you point out in the book there is a connection between the pleasure of fear and group dynamic.
Yes, this is one of my favorite things to look at, too, because it's such a nice combination of sociology and psychology. When we're with people that we really care about, we can enhance each other's emotions. So it's almost like our emotions become contagious in a way, not in, of course, in a real way, but in a way that we have studied. And there's actually a really great article. I don't talk about it in the book, but it looks at family and friends watching their loved ones walk on coals. And they measure people's physiological reactions, while that's happening. And they see that, when you are watching someone you care about do something scary or just emotionally intense, you feel it too in a real way. Your body responds in a similar way. And so we enhance the experience when we're with people that we really care about. And I think that's a very, cool thing that's likely adapted over our evolution that helps us, be there for each other in times of stress and also bonds us more closely together. And so that's why, it's so much fun to do these things with friends and family because we're feeding off of each other's emotional experiences. It can also work the other way. If you're with someone that you don't like and you distrust, there's been studies showing that it can increase your distrust of them so that you're, further avoiding them. But, if you're with people that you really love and care about, it can intensify it and bring you closer together.
That section of the book really got me thinking about the other unique thing that happens on our tours quite frequently, and that's either wedding proposals or people who went on their first date. They did a haunted walk as their first activity, kind of first date, I guess, and they end up getting married and they come back to us for anniversaries and things of that nature. And you also point out that going through these scary experiences can really bond people together in a meaningful way.
Yeah. All of our systems are in go mode, so to speak. And so if you're with someone that you're attracted to or that you have already kind of positive feelings towards, and you go into an even more intense emotional experience in your brain and in your memory, you're going to think, oh, this person really is the best. The experience is going to feel so much more intense than if you were maybe just taking a walk in a park or something like that. So it is a good opportunity to create some strong connections and kind of intensify the moment. I do recommend, attractions or scary experiences for first dates.
Now, one of your ventures, I think our listeners would be very interested in hearing more about, was your exploration of several haunted attractions in Japan. We devoted an entire episode a few months ago to exploring kind of the history and the mechanics of Disney's Haunted Mansion, which honestly might be one of my favorite places on Earth. But for those of us who haven't had the opportunity to visit these attractions in other places, Japan in particular in this case, how would you say Japanese haunted attractions differ from the ones we have in North America?
Well, I found that they are a lot of the more, the ones that aren't fully Americanized. The American version of the haunt has been exported, but in the Japanese ones that I could tell were more highly influenced just by Japanese culture, there's a lot more attention to ghosts, to spirits, and there is that more creepy kind of spooky vibe, and just a little bit darker and quiet, at least in the, there's a quietness that punctuates the loud sounds that come that I noticed. Also, in one of the attractions that was, I thought, the scariest, there was incorporation of kind of a little bit of gameplay. So, I had to do something in there. I had to, recite a poem. I had to throw it into a fire. I had a mission of saving a school child. And so it felt a lot more active. It felt like I was really part of it rather than just passively walking through. So that's what I noticed, and definitely I would say that the monsters, being more of this spiritual, ghostly realm rather than say serial killers or the more human, scary characters that we see in the U.S.
Now, one fear that unexpectedly played a role in your adventures there, in those haunted attractions, was the fear of embarrassment. And I thought it was really fascinating, your section about how you actually broke a number of kind of social norms while doing these attractions that you were totally unaware of, which kind of had you on two levels, the kind of the scary fun of the attraction, but you were also kind of at the same time worried about not doing anything culturally insensitive or wrong. Does fear of embarrassment actually rank fairly high up on the list generally for people, almost superseding the fun, scary part?
Yeah, it definitely can, and it'll vary by culture and by person. But when we think about competing for the top priority in our brain, social embarrassment ranks pretty high for a lot of people. And definitely when we look at the rates of social phobia as they've increased over the years, fear of embarrassment or shame or anything that's coming from external social pressure can just jump to our biggest priority and be more scary than, say, a ghost popping out next to us. That fear of embarrassment, that fear of shame, it does hold such a large place in our kind of constellation of things that we're afraid of. And again, it'll vary by person and by culture, but because we live in such a social world, because we really depend on our ability to communicate and interact with others, it's jumped to the top of the list compared to, say, 200 years ago when maybe we would be more afraid of bears or, the environment. But today we really depend on our ability to integrate into society. And so whenever we feel like we cross that, it can feel, just as scary as seeing a bear.
One of the chapters of the book that I think might be of special interest to our listeners is the night you followed paranormal investigators through Eastern State Penitentiary. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. But before we get into it, just to set the scene, in case our listeners are unfamiliar with Eastern State Penitentiary, could you share a little of its history with us and kind of how the property is used today?
It's the world's first penitentiary, so the first prison system built on the idea and the belief that prisoners could be rehabilitated. So prior to its building in 1829, most prisons were just holding cells until a judge, sentenced a person, which was typically to death or just to, remain in a prison for a given amount of time. But there was no focus on rehabilitation. And so the penitentiary was highly influenced by Quakers, and the goal was to, protect people's identity. So all prisoners were in solitary confinement 24/7. They could not interact with anyone. They were supposed to pray and reflect on their sins and repent, and that was the goal. So it was actually, for the time, a humanitarian objective, but it quickly went south. I mean, almost immediately. There were abuses of power, and people quickly learned that solitary confinement is not good for humans or really any living thing, that we quickly deteriorate mentally, physically, and so the solitary confinement was abandoned largely due to overcrowding, too. There just wasn't enough space, so they started putting more and more people into the cells. And so the penitentiary was open until 1971, which is really wild to think about when you're standing in it today, because, there's still people who are alive who were prisoners and guards in 1971. And the building is just so old, and it's so much in a state of ruin that to think that there were people in there as recently as 1971 is hard to believe. And they do a reunion weekend now where they bring back prisoners and guards to talk about their experiences there, which is just a in-person history lesson. It's amazing. But today it's a historic site and a museum. So they call it now a sustained ruin, and all the efforts and the fundraising they do are to keep it from deteriorating more, but to preserve the history so that we can learn from it. So it's an amazing historic site and just one of the creepiest places that I have ever been.
Returning to your night of ghost hunting at Eastern State Penitentiary, how would you describe your belief or thoughts of the paranormal before you took part in that activity?
I've always been a skeptic, but a hopeful skeptic. I still really would love to have a paranormal experience, ghostly experience. And I went in really opening myself up to the possibility. As a skeptic and a scientist, I want to try and understand, all potential influences on what I'm experiencing. And I know that there are a lot of things that we don't know that we have yet to study and discover. So, I went in trying to keep a very open mind, no judgment, and to just see what this was all about, why people like to do these types of investigations. And it was really a wonderful experience. It was surprising. I had never witnessed, I guess, professional ghost hunters in action. So that was eye-opening for me. And I did have a very intense experience that in the moment I felt like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And so I get why people really enjoy it. I'm still, I'm still a skeptic. I'm still, have yet to see a ghost. But I love imagining that there, are so many things out there that we just haven't discovered yet. So it was a very cool experience.
Now that you've kind of teased us that something interesting did happen, could you share with us what that was?
Well, we were standing outside one of the cells at Eastern State, and it was totally dark, and the psychic who was in the group said that there was a ghost inside, or there was a spirit there, and they had a recorder, an old-time recorder that I used to use growing up, the kind where you have to press, play and record at the same time, and you can hear the cassette tape kind of wind around. And while we were standing there for a long time, just in the most deafening silence. I mean, it was just quiet, and all you could hear was just the turning of the cassette tape as they, recorded just the space. And I felt a powerful kind of all over goosebumps, or what some people call frisson, or the feeling you get when you hear a really emotional song. I felt that all over, and I thought, oh my gosh, a ghost must have just walked through me. In looking back and reflecting on it, I think that I was just having an intense emotional experience that was likely brought on by, a night of creeping around dark and spooky places, and also just my imagination kind of getting away, being in the moment, and the nostalgia too of the tape recorder, feeling like I was kind of time traveling to my past. So I think it was a just highly emotional experience, but who knows, maybe it was a ghost.
I would say one of my favorite passages from the book comes from that chapter, and it has to do with a question we often wrestle with on our tours or even on the podcast about whether ghosts are something external to ourselves and exist as kind of spirits that have passed on, returning to our reality in some manner, or if we're kind of haunted in our own brains by external stimuli that's having an unknown effect upon us, or even chemicals within our brain causing us to have certain responses. And the quote I thought was so great is you wrote, "My advice for those who see a ghost or feel a presence around them, be sure to add visiting a neurologist to your quest for answers." I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Sure. So there has been some studies looking at what could induce a feeling of sensed presence, or the feeling that you're not alone, or there's, a shadowy figure next to you. And they've been able to simulate that feeling by activating part of the temporal lobe that's concerned with how we know that we are occupying our body, so our sense of body ownership. And when that one part of the brain is activated, people do report feeling like, somebody is standing next to them. And then there's also evidence from people who have temporal lobe epilepsy. They report similar feelings, that they're not alone, but also feeling like they're connected to some supernatural power, or something bigger than themselves. Also, some fMRI studies done with Carmelite nuns and Buddhists show that when they feel they're communing with God or a higher power, that, parts of the brain that are concerned with sense of self are highly activated. So I think it is interesting to wonder what could be happening in our brain that might make us feel like like we're being haunted. I think of things like deja vu too, which some neurologists say is where the lapse of time as information works its way through different parts of your brain. But, when you dig into some of the neuroscience and start to see how much of our reality is, being filtered and created and constructed in our minds, and how many places that can go wrong or just twist in just the slightest way that might give us a sense of unreality or something, potentially paranormal, that there's just so many things that could lead to us experiencing that's just a matter of brain functioning.
An external example you mentioned is something called infrasound, which I thought was very intriguing. Could you explain what infrasound is and how that might affect our brain?
So infrasound is sound waves under 20 hertz, and humans can hear well above 20 hertz, but below that we really can't hear it in a way that we normally think about. But even though we can't hear it, our body can still register the vibrations. So, the vibrations through our skin, even through our eyes, and that can alert our, automatic nervous system that something might not be quite right. And so we may not be consciously aware of it in that we're not hearing any sound, but our body is registering it. And that can make us feel uneasy. And there have been reports of feeling creepy or just a sense of unease. With infrasound, though, you do have to be very close to the source to experience it. But a lot of old places are full of things like, HVAC systems that are breaking down, where wind can generate that kind of low frequency vibration. So it is something I always am curious about, when people report feeling of unease or feeling like something is there. It could be environmentally generated infrasound. This is what, animals register in advance of a earthquake or tsunami. And like in Japan, in advance of the earthquake and tsunami, animals were, making their way inland. And they think it's because, they were registering the infrasound and knew that that something was coming.
In the book, you mentioned kind of an experiment a researcher did where they were playing infrasound over, I think, in a concert kind of setting, some type of large audio setup. But I guess what you're saying is infrasound can also just be occurring, maybe not naturally, but unintentionally in a lot of places, which could be why people think certain locations are haunted.
Yeah. Even low-flying planes, thunder. There's lots of environmental occurrences that can generate infrasound. At times could be, right around us, and we may not consciously be aware of it.
Now, after you had done all these adventures, you kind of moved to the stage where you took all this research that you had done on fear and applied it at Scarehouse in Pittsburgh, who you worked with, developing kind of a new attraction in their basement, coincidentally named The Basement, which is always a great name, I think, for a haunted attraction. Could you talk a little bit maybe about, I guess, the research and the application, how that works, and of course, maybe a few examples of some of the really creepy things you created?
Well, I wanted to create a haunted attraction that had a clear focus on being entertaining, making people feel better, making people feel like they were a hero, not a victim. Because, in some of the places that I had been, there's not that intention. And, some attractions just want to scare people and quite honestly make them feel bad. And that's the goal. And for me, that is problematic. And so I wanted to try and create a hero's journey. And so, leaning on history and science, psychology, sociology, I tried to think about how we could do that. And that meant, making sure that people had a clear idea of what they were signing up for. And also, giving people opportunities to push themselves, push their boundaries, and playing a lot with the senses. So one of the big things that I spent a lot of time researching is how our senses inform our experience and our obviously our idea of reality. So some of the scenes would incorporate, blindfolds or even restraining people so that they were put off balance because not all of their senses were able to inform them of what was really happening, and creating that real intense fear, but in a safe environment and with a focus on empowerment and making sure people, came out feeling better. So I would really think about manipulating sight and sound, even using some mild electricity, which gets the sympathetic nervous system going. Whether you're afraid or not, you shock somebody, and that's going to get their system into go mode, and then from there it's easier to engage with all the experiences because your thinking brain, so to speak, isn't online.
What role does narrative kind of play? For example, we do a tour called Incident at the Bunker, where we fill Canada's old emergency bunker in case of nuclear attack with zombies and kind of bring a zombie film to life. But we really believe that the narrative or being involved in the story is essential to being scared, aside from a cheap kind of pop scare or something of that nature. Have you found that in your research as well, that narrative is really important to kind of our immersion in the experience?
Yeah, and what I've found is it really depends on the type of experience that you're crafting. So for ghost hunts and ghost tours or experiences that are longer or that have opportunities for downtime, narrative is so important. Humans, we are storytellers. We understand each other and our world through stories, and so building a rich story is so important. If it's someplace like an amusement park where you have just a fun house, narrative may not be as important. You're waiting in line, you go in, you walk through, and there's lots of startles, and then you exit. But if you really want people to feel fully immersed and to suspend their disbelief and engage in the experience, then a good story is critical. I've found that with scary experiences, making sure that they grasp the storyline in advance helps a lot, because then once they're in the experience, they kind of know the players, and they have an idea of what's going on. Because once they are in a state of fear, it's harder for people to really grasp new plot lines, like, wait, what is happening here? Why is there this person? But if they know in advance and it's a high startle attraction, then the story is going to be really helpful. And one of my very intense moments was in doing a ghost tour, a historical ghost tour in Bogota, in the Bogota Cemetery. And the whole ghost tour was centered on stories of the people who were buried there. And it was, even though I don't speak Spanish, I had a translator with me, and I got so caught up in the stories of all of these people's lives. And when it ended with the singing of the national anthem, I was so moved. Everybody was holding hands, and the story just made the whole experience more rich and memorable.
Where are your adventures in the science of fear taking you next?
Well, right now, my colleague and I are working on a research project that will see if we can use fun scary, this construct of fun scary, to help people with issues with anxiety. We're thinking that it can act, choosing to do something scary, but that incorporates lots of positive elements. So, absurd elements like monsters or, just kind of crazy elements along with scary elements. It can, give them a boost of confidence in the moment. So say do a scary VR for 3 minutes before going in for a job interview, because you'll almost like a stress inoculation. And also working on incorporating fun into, therapeutic approaches to help people overcome their fears. I think that there's a real opportunity there to add, fun elements into things like exposure therapy, because nobody wants to do exposure therapy. It's confronting your biggest fears, but maybe if we make it fun, it'll help with adherence and outcomes.
It's such a compelling subject matter for sure. If people are interested in following your work and what's going on with you, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Online, my website is margeekerr.com, and I'm Margee Kerr on Twitter and Instagram. So those are the best places to find me.
And just a reminder, the book is Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear. And I can guarantee you, if you're a regular listener to our podcast, this is a book you will seriously enjoy and not be able to put down. I just had a great time reading it. Margee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Margee Kerr for just a wonderful conversation, and it's certainly given me pause to reconsider some of my fears. I'd also like to thank Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for the additional music, and as always, to Michelle Dennis, our audio editor. Tour information can be found on our website, hauntedwalk.com, and I'd strongly recommend following us on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter, all at Haunted Walk, so you get the latest information to see what we're up to. Recently, we shared a blog post written by Jill Sullivan, one of our tour guides in Toronto, a really interesting piece about some of the unusual things that have been discovered along the lakefront in Toronto. So be sure to check that out, hauntedwalk.com/news, or you can find it on any of our social sites as well. Quick reminder, if you do plan to join us for the Halloween season, you can save 15% if you buy before Labor Day using the promo code Haunted Talks, all one word. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.